Alrighty, so this week 8, the first assignment, I want to go over some other loops because although the for each is great, I also think learning some of the other, and we're going to see other loops as we continue through the course anyway, so it's a good time. So my goals of this one is just to show you the for each and the for of loop. So set up a folder 014. And by the way, from now on, make sure you're following the naming that I've given you. I do think using branches is good, but I get concerned of throwing too many new things at students. So your feedback's always helpful. And then as before, and I just show you, I have mine set up here, right? Do that README file. So this will be 8. And then we'll go through and we'll have some things that will have you put easy for you to say in here. Okay. All right. So have that set up. And then as generally always, right, have your, and I think I'm also ready to start setting up. Matter of fact, I was playing with before I started this one. Oh, actually, I was in the wrong one. Always make sure you're in the right one. Um, I was actually playing with converting the code we have so far into a module. And it's really fun to look at it as a module, but, and again, maybe that's our first item that you can tell me is, would you like to see, right? Would you like to see an example of this code written in module format? If you remember modularize in 004 was one I went over and Todd went over as well. So anyway, let me know that. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to go up here. So we know that to calculate sum. And the thing about calculate sum, I would just say for a minute, is the nice thing is that even if we needed to add something together, so multiple entries, not necessarily for an average, we could use this function, right, outside of how we're using it today, meaning directly. That's what I like about, and that's a good approach to using when you're making your functions very precise inputs and very precise outputs. You can use them for other things you would need in your code, which is why you want to do them. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, just for a minute, and by the way, make sure, right? So make sure you got your live server going, you have your dev tools open, 14, right? Make sure that code is working from before. One of the things I know that probably maybe using branching for is when you're writing some of your own code. And I notice a couple of you have actually created new folders and you kind of say my functions. I think that's okay too. So maybe we could talk about the best way, feedback about that, because I know I have you write code along with me and then I have you change some things, write some code on your own. And I'm wondering if that gets a little confusing when we pick back up and we continue coding along. So, second item to give me feedback. So now I have 2 items already in your README file. Okay. So it looks like this code is working, no problems, main.js. I don't see any errors, so we're good to go. Okay. So in here, I'm going to go into the for each, right? Because the for each is, like I said, wonderful and very, like, you need to understand how to write a for each loop. You just do. And, but I think it's kind of busy, if I had to be completely honest. And I think what is probably more common is what's called the for each loop. So let's just go look real quick, right? So if I do for each, loop JS. What's our first entry in Mozilla is the for each loop. Okay, so there's different ways to write the for each. It's definitely cleaner. Like, look at this, right? So now this is, of course, here's your array, your for each, and what happens is it iterates over, it loops over the array, and for every entry in the array, it is going to be held in, I guess, or declared in the block scope, and it'll be called element. I'll show you that in a minute. And in this case, because we only have one line that we're using the arrow function. But this is actually the first time we've been introduced to something called a callback function, because what you're using here is you're actually using a built-in method, and part of that method itself has what we call a callback function. Okay. So if we scroll down a little farther, one of the things that you see is and if you've never heard this, it's called a callback function. Okay. So when on a for each, it's a iterative method. It provides a callback function once for every element in the array. Okay, now this is a different kind of function than we've written, this callback idea. So let's just write it and then we'll talk about it as we do it. Okay, so in here, I'm going to specify the array. And actually, I need to talk about value versus reference. Todd brought it up, and now's a good time. Well, not now. I need to talk about it. Let's put it that way. Dot for each. Now, notice my editor is actually going to try to help me by giving me these what we call signature, but I don't like the way it does it, and you'll see why. When I click on that, it actually gives some default data of an array, but in my case, I know I've specified the array as actually array ARR, so I can just get rid of that. But the rest of the signature, and I don't like the semicolon, is totally fine. So this is in this case, it's a method, but it's a signature for the for each. And so then each of these each of the elements inside of the array. Now, remember, what is an element? Let's just go look. So if I was to say MPG, right? And I was to say 0, that's the first. And in this case, oh my, that's right. At the end of the last one, I changed it. Okay. So that is the first, in this case, entry, like the first, it's the 0 indexed within the array, but the for each calls that an element. Okay. So where you had to specify, like you had to reference the index that I was being used as the index, you don't have to do this here, which by the way, you could still get the index if you needed it, FYI. But let's just console log, right? The element, because I want you to see it, right? The element itself. All right? Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to hit my breakpoint right here. Okay, good. I've commented out the other one. So I have the array for each. And now if I hit step, it grabs the first element, right? Which I know is the first element right here. And it's just going to console log it, right? So this is doing the same thing as the for each, except to me, and maybe you could give me feedback here. Is it to you cleaner? Now I'm going to show you how to use it to sum in a minute, but I just want you to see, right? It's going through. By the way, if you ever see this too, it just means there was 2 entries in there of 25. That's what that means. All right, so now it's done. It's through the loop, okay? So now what we can do here is instead of just console logging it, we can go ahead and use that sum, okay? And now I'm going to show you, I'm going to say sum plus equal element. Okay? Remember I was talking about, you may have heard me say, when we did this before, sum equals sum plus whatever that value is, there is also another I think it's actually plus equal, sorry. Is it plus equal or is it equal plus? Yeah. Plus equal. Yeah. Okay, I had it wrong. So this is just a shorthand way to actually do that. I could actually had the editor tell me it was an error, but I just thought, well, I'll go do it. Okay. So it's an operator, adds the value of the right operator to the variable assignment, and the results in the variable, right? So basically you're taking whatever A was plus equal, and in this case, it's a value, but it could also be, in our case, an element. So let's see if that works. We'll go ahead and run this. Go ahead and run it. Ooh, get off of that, right? And by the way, this also, if you ever like, because what happens on live server is it just runs and it runs every time you change code. So when you come back here to run it, sometimes I just hit X here. and then I refresh the page, and then I get the most current code, and then I can walk through it. So sum, right? So now it's 24. So now it's 51, right? It looks like it's adding up, so we'll just let it keep going. Good, 142. Okay. So by the way, that 142, isn't that funny? 42 meaning of life. Now it's 142, but it's the same value as was coming out of here. And that's just a good way to check when you're writing different loops to see that you're getting the same value out, right? So that's a nice way to do it, right? So in this case, let's now that we have the for each. Now again, I'm just introducing these concepts we are using. Okay, so let me just be clear now, right? This is a callback function. Now, in the parentheses, right? So when we're calling the method, the built-in method called for each, and when we're doing it, we're invoking that by passing it a callback function. That all it says in this case says when you run the for each for each element, do this. Okay, so it's a callback on each of them. All right. If you want to know more about that, which I think is good, right? You can come down here, is invoked for every array element which has an assigned value, right? And again, the nice thing is, to me, this is just clearer. You don't have to set up the length. It's just, I don't know, I like it. I typically will write for each versus a for loop. But there is another loop that I think is kind of cool. And I think very often is used. And I was looking at this because when I looked over the documentation in the for, there's different ones, and we didn't even look at yet some of the other ones like the do while. We'll look at that one as well. Uh, do while some condition, right? So it's the do while, the while. So do while is the other one. So actually, I was thinking what maybe I'll have you do for your play around was actually, implement some do while and while loops, just because I think it's good, and come up with your own code for those. I think that actually might be what I'll have you do on your own here. Okay. All right, so now let's go down. So anyway, look over those, right? And again, look at the examples, come up then with and writing your own code. And the other way I want to show you how to do this, because I know the other thing I've done before, I've used a for in, but I was reading this today and it said really for arrays, it's not a good idea. So then it says for arrays, you use the for variable of an object, and you can include in this arrays, maps, sets, and so forth. I talked a little baby about arguments and well, we'll talk about that later because it's a good topic to go over. So let me just show you this one. So so if we do this, we say for, and now we could call this, and in this case, it's the variable, and it says object, but it could be in the array. So I would say for each. Now, in this case, maybe EA is just my variable declaration for what that is, for what each of them. So maybe what I'll do is instead of EA, because it'll be confusing with the other one, for item, right? Or for MPG. I could say that. No, I couldn't because I'm also running cost. So that didn't make sense, right? So naming things is hard. For item, let me say item. For of item of array. Okay. Console log item. All right, let's go look at that here. All right. There we go. So now we're actually, I guess I had a breakpoint set there already. So now the first item would be 24. And yeah, that's the first one that, oh, let's not do it that way. That's the first one. And so we know this for item and array. Again, item is a variable I came up with. You can name it whatever makes sense to you. The array is specifying the array itself. And then what we're doing is iterating. Again, we're iterating over this. Okay, cool. Just let it go. And then it will return this. Oh, by the way, right now it won't return the sum, so it's going to break the code. Right? So what we have to do is that same thing. Sum plus equal, right? In this case, item. And actually, I think value makes more sense. Okay. Let's see if that works. What do you think? Naming it's a joke actually in programming. One of the hardest things is naming things. Good. It worked. Came out. That's why also having a kind of a consistent amount or output of data that you know of helps you quickly see if your code is actually working, which is awesome. Okay, back here. All right, so I think we're long enough for this first video. So on more looping, what I'm going to have you do, I don't have it written here yet, but what I will do is have you write. You can create a new one called O14 and call it My Loops. And in that folder, you don't have to bring over all this code. You can just create the index file, create a main.js, and in there, I want you to play around with some of the other loops. I want you to see if you can come up with examples, like look at these examples of, well, that's not a good one. Okay, the while. I want you to play around with the while do, right? And the while, and get used to just seeing how to write code for them, right? So it repeats until a specific condition evaluates to false, right? And then it gives you an example. So look at the examples, come up with your own. And then the difference between the while and they're similar, and it's really in when they execute what's inside. Okay, so play around with those, and then your commit I'll give you, which would be my I'll give it to you in here. I'll write it right now.